So thank you all. I want to start with a disclaimer, which was I was very ambitious when I put this talk together, both with the title, but also the fact I could fit this into 10 minutes. So if there's any questions, please come afterwards. I'm going through sort of a multi-month project, case study in just a few minutes, and yeah, I'll definitely be up the back afterwards. So a very brief introduction to myself, and again, very abbreviated. Skyscanner, I want to give a shout out to my colleague Maria, who spoke just before lunch, sort of covered a lot of the challenges that we're facing. But the main one that I want to shout out for this talk is the fact that we have a lot of geographically distributed engineers in multiple time zones that don't really match up. Now, when I tried to sort of plot communication paths, I ran out of space on the screen very quickly, and even when I tried to sort of map these, first of all, it just looked like this. If you think of where you have directors talking to directors, engineering managers, but then also, we're humans. We're not a system where you can say this system will only talk to this system. Everybody can and should and will talk to everybody. And so it's impossible to really map these, but it also means it's a challenge when you have to try and influence all of these people. So what was the challenge that I had to face for this talk? Now, we've heard a lot about ambiguous problems. I was given a very ambiguous problem by my manager, which was, I've been hearing about quality issues in our app from other directors. Can you put a strategy in place to address these? My very first question was, what do we mean by quality? Because by every objective measurement that we had, things were looking good. We had good reviews, we had good performance and availability. So where was the concern coming from? And it turned out this was actually around code quality. So, okay, I know something to look at. So how did I start tackling this? What did I try and start looking into? And I knew we needed effective measurements. I think I can track my growth as an engineer and as a leader by how much I believe in having a good metric or metrics for a project. We'd previously used some sort of measurement tools, but as being a travel company during COVID, we had to really streamline what we were maintaining, and this had sort of fallen away. And so I looked, okay, how can we reintroduce something similar? How can we actually maybe simplify this, have less to maintain? And I had to then set the vision. So I said, okay, I think this is the approach that we can take. Had to start building sort of this rapport across the company. Because we need buy-in from engineers. All of us work with engineers very closely. Engineers are ultimately the ones writing the most of the code. They need to have buy-in on these tools. You need buy-in from principal engineers or staff engineers such as yourselves. As you provide the direction, you might want to do different things like, hey, write a really complex query to understand for this particular squad in the last X months, how have things changed? And also buy-in from the directors, because not only do they ultimately set sort of budget decisions, but they also raised the original concern. So they need to feel confident that their concern is being addressed. And often, there's quite a mismatch among this. As I'm sure we all know, there's maybe sort of tools that directors will love, give them all this information that the engineers on the ground will love, will not love at all. I won't name sort of popular task management tracking software, but I'm sure we all have an idea sort of where I'm going with that. And sort of having these conversations is great, speaking face-to-face. I am a believer of a good face-to-face or a quick Zoom call can unblock things very quickly. But we go back to this, all of this yarn, how do you actually untangle this? Because if I tried to still keep these face-to-face conversations, my calendar, thinking of these different time zones, all these different people, we just start looking like this. I found this online. Whoever this is definitely needs to watch Blanca's talk from yesterday multiple times, I feel like. And it's just not sustainable at all. But one other thing with this is, even if you're the kind of person who might thrive, I know people, and sometimes I'm like that myself, I'm like, I can deal with this calendar, I'll be completely fine. You're then putting that on other people. You might have other people, a lot of people you work with don't want a quick Zoom call. They don't want to be interrupted, very conscious of their maker time in the case of engineers or other people. And so you should also feel about how you can help them. And so then when I actually link back to the title, given this problem, how did I start scaling my influence to make this a success? So the plan, okay, we decided on a static analysis tool. We made sure all the integrations were working. As soon as we were sure it was ready, we said we're good to go. We disabled every single check, literally hit the disable all button. And the reason we did this was we decided introducing many checks overnight would not have gone well. Nyana gave a great talk on trust to kick the conference off yesterday morning, suddenly telling all the engineers, hey, your code isn't meeting these standards overnight, sort of doesn't just empty that jar, it shatters it. And so we decided to start with only one key check, code coverage. quite controversial. I think there was even a lead dev article or talk recently about this. We had a lot of reasons. We did a lot of research. Again, only 10 minutes, so please speak to me afterwards to find out more. But we actually started, so we wrote guides on how we can improve our code coverage, how this fits into our architecture, lots of documentation, making sure this was up to date. And we wrote a lot of custom integrations around this. We thought we can't just introduce a tool and say we're good to go. So we added integrations for our pull requests. So all of the new code meets a quality threshold, it meets certain checks. We wrote internal dashboards where you can quickly visualize these, as I said earlier, sort of slice this data however you want to. And what we call like our tribe or departmental level reports, which already existed, but we piggybacked where we actually sort of filtered this data for a particular tribe and give that sort of headline, high level overview of this is how things are progressing, this is what you need to work on. And thankfully, we really do have a culture of trust at Skyscanner. So there was no shaming when we introduced this data. It took a long time to build this up. It was just informing, trying everybody to help everybody else improve. And this was all to just reduce this friction of a new tool. Even the finance approval was quicker, which for those of you who work at bigger companies, that takes a long time. In terms of how we scaled this as well, so we started tracking where squads opted out. We thought, okay, we can't just opt everybody in, make it mandatory. But we actually did this. I worked with some of the more junior engineers in the squad as well to frame it as, if a squad opted out of these checks, this doesn't mean they're doing the wrong thing. More likely it means it's something that we missed in our approach. So we actually reached out to these engineers and said, hey, we saw you added this label, we saw you skipped it. And in a lot of cases it was, oh, your documentation wasn't clear enough, I didn't know what to do. And this was very much like a teaching moment for us, and it actually really helped us build trust with these engineers as well, that we knew what we were doing. And again, lots of talks on documentation, we communicated everything that we were doing. So what did this actually mean? What progress were we able to make? One of the things Alice mentioned yesterday, each project needs a good headline, and this was sort of one that we managed to get. Literally, Michael and his tribe are focusing on increasing code quality and code coverage. This was great. You could then go do the deep dive into all of the reasoning, but in terms of communicating this out, it made my job really, really easy, and everybody knew where the focus was. This also gave 1 or 2 numbers, because it's an app and we have iOS and Android to share when talked about progress. I just roughly made these numbers up, but you could literally say, here is the graph, here's how it's going, and that's the high-level number. And Tanya spoke about OKRs yesterday morning. It's also a great OKR number to just say, I increased this from this to this. And we actually link now this back to the original communication structures that I spoke about. So the engineers are now getting their immediate PR feedback. They feel empowered through documentation to understand that they're doing the right thing. Principal engineers like yourselves are able to do the same and do deep dives into this data to look for patterns, look for trends in their areas. And directors are able to view these sort of weekly reports and get their summary, know what they need to work on. And what was also really fun is an unintended consequence. Directors gamified this and literally were competing against each other to make sure that their areas were showing the most improvements week on week, which was fun. And it's actually also helped with our platform or sort of DevX engineer motivation. For those of you who work in these sorts of squads or teams, you might know it's often very hard to get the same feedback when you do if you're just shipping something to a customer, you see it immediately. And by viewing these graphs, it really helped us seeing things going the right way. And we also held ourselves to the same standards. Unfortunately, our platform team who were working on this had some of the lowest coverage on a lot of areas of the code. And we thought, okay, we have to address this ourselves. In terms of the outcomes that we managed to achieve from this, or I managed to achieve from this personally as well in my role, first of all, my calendar does not look like this, which is great. I still need to take some of Blanca's advice because it's still crazy, but definitely not this bad. And we're seeing steady, sustainable growth. We're not just seeing something where it goes up for a little bit and then either plateaus or just slowly dips down again. We're really seeing this sort of up and to the right steady growth. Engineer feedback shows it's embedded in our way of working, and it's also been really sustainable for me. It was quite a large project up front, putting all of this in place, all of these custom integrations, but I've managed to shift my focus elsewhere now while sort of having this in the background. As an example, I'm now looking at data pipelines and behavioral data emissions, so nothing to do with code quality, and that's just been really nice for my personal growth. One of the other favorite pieces of feedback I got was this quote. I had an engineer come to me from one of the squads and say, hey, we got it flagged in our reports, our code coverage, our quality standards aren't quite up to scratch. Instead of raising this, can we just delete the legacy module if we push for the final migration? They framed this as actually almost a bad thing, saying, hey, we think we're doing the wrong thing. This was my favorite piece of feedback because it was just amazing to feel like this legacy code has been talked of being removed for literally 5 years. And we're finally doing it through this push. I said, please go for it and find as much code as you can delete as possible. And, only now are we looking at what other checks we can enable. Very cautious not to break this trust. So in terms of the lessons learned, just to sort of very quickly summarize, number one was keep metrics small and focused. You don't want to give an array of metrics or array of numbers. You want to keep one, maybe two, that can very quickly be shared. You want to be transparent to build the trust. Some of the other feedback we got as well was actually by seeing the platform squad actively working on increasing this coverage and this metrics ourselves. Other squads, again, felt empowered to follow our lead and do the same. Tailor and communicate in the best way for your audience. But everybody's busy. You're busy, I'm busy, everybody you work with is busy. Put in the effort up front to work on this integrations and tooling to make it easier for other people to understand because it will pay you dividends. And finally, I would just say, go watch James's talk from yesterday if you missed it on documentation because he said everything I need to say. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.